Hi, I'm Kimberly Stuck. I'm the founder and CEO of Allay Consulting. We're a cannabis consulting firm that deals with FDA, Osha, Fire Code, Gmp certification, ISO certification, organic certification, and also your state regulatory bodies.
I'm Kelly O'Connor, and I am a business development representative for Columbia Laboratories. We serve the food and feed industries, as well as hemp and cannabis, nutraceuticals, consumer packaged goods, and environmental testing. We are here today to bring all of those resources together to discuss best practices.
Me and my team actually came from government side when I worked in Colorado. I was the cannabis regulator, and so I've seen a lot of stories. So we will get there. Awesome. Kelly, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of ties us together, Kim, is that we do have so much experience working in other regulated industries, right? And so that's a big part of some of the consulting that we do here in-house at the lab as well. When you say all those different organizations like FDA, it stretches out to like TTB, and then now we're in international markets and stuff. And so it's a really cool time to bring all that together, and that's what we're hoping to share with you guys during this presentation. So best practices in an evolving market. We've got some tips in here for everyone to enjoy, but I think what we want to present as well is a holistic view about the importance of really stretching beyond minimum requirements of, compliance, and even defining what compliance means, but kind of taking a step back and looking at the big picture of how to stay nimble in that market and how to look for guidance in really good examples that are out there today and some resources that can help support that transition as well.
Yeah, and a lot of compliance, just like Kelly said, that's a huge, broad term. And when we're talking about compliance, at least today, we're talking about compliances that is a lot about risk mitigation and making your brand like compliant for when federal legalization starts, I think. Awesome. So jumping right in. So compliance, why do we care about these kinds of compliances? So, obviously there is, licensing and all of that, but, worker health and safety is super, super important. OSHA is knocking on doors in the cannabis industry, especially. We've had a huge influx of that during COVID because people weren't, doing the 6-foot separation correctly. They weren't hand sanitizing. They weren't closing when they were supposed to if there was an outbreak. So we've gained quite a few clients over COVID just because OSHA started knocking on the doors, public health and safety as well. So many, and especially in the THC industry, are not being regulated the same way that other like food manufacturers are being regulated. And I don't think that a lot of the general public really realizes that. But in states like Oregon, the health department doesn't actually go into THC facilities. They do visit some hemp facilities, so that's really great. They're starting to kind of get into it. But, going above and beyond and knowing the federal regulations, CFR 111 for FDA or 117, which is supplements or food, and understanding those and implementing those early on could save your company a whole lot of heartache down the road. Verifying marketing claims, kind of the same thing. I mean, I think everybody has heard it, especially in the hemp industry. Do not make any medical claims or claims of certification that are untrue or anything like that, because you will be fined. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. Getting these kinds of certifications or getting certifications at all in the health and safety realm, GMP, ISO 9001, ISO 22000, all of those things will help you be compliant with FDA regulations when it comes down the road. And then just preventing outbreaks and recalls, risk mitigation, and then preventing negativity in the media. That's a really big deal in cannabis. If, in food, like regular food, if somebody gets sick, or passes away, God forbid, it happens all the time. There are people who die from food poisoning. I mean, it sounds terrible, but it does happen a lot. But in cannabis, that's frontline federal news. We want to make sure that we're protecting our industry by making sure that we're having a safe product, because it's a huge black eye on the industry and it makes us all look really bad when these kinds of things happen. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point to make, that cannabis is held to a different scrutiny. There's stricter testing regulations in the cannabis industry, certainly, than there are in the food industry, food manufacturing industry. But there's a lot of inconsistencies as well, which we'll kind of touch base on how to fill those gaps. So since, taking a bigger look at what's going on outside of our own walls here, we've been going since about 2015. And in 2018, of course, the Farm Bill allowing for interstate trade and commerce in hemp industries has really pushed regulators to start to have to pay attention to all these things that Kim just mentioned. And that's drawing attention to that specific industry. As that has progressed, the states are looking to align their testing practices in order to assist that interstate trade. You can imagine it's pretty difficult when you don't have the same regulations state by state. And then as that's developing and happening, there's the Vape Crisis that came about in 2019, which spurred a Secretary of State audit here in Oregon, which is kind of the spark for us having a lot of regulation changes coming up, again, with the onus of getting different states aligned together, whether that's ahead of federalization as the purpose or not. Really, the point of that is to make sure that we have safe product out onto the market. And the other thing that's happening during all this time is cannabis research. We have more data now than we've ever had before on cannabis for bioavailability, toxicology, drug interferences, and with isolates and all sorts of things. And that cannabis science is also what's spurring a lot of the developments in the regulatory framework. Slap that big cannabis black eye on top of it, and what do you have? One of the most regulated, non-regulated interstate markets in the history of our planet. So what a time to be alive. We've got 46 states now in the U.S. regulating cannabis in some way, shape, or form, right? So everyone's paying attention to it, and now the time is where you're on the forefront as a producer, as a processor, as a infused product, consumer packaged goods manufacturer, to be paying attention and to be really safeguarding yourself against what's bound to come.
Oh my gosh. There we go. So moving forward, so just as Kelly said, I mean, it's the most regulated, unregulated market. I mean, it's a really weird gray area that we're in, and we're all kind of in it together, kind of looking at each other like, what do we do? More manufacturers are taking responsibility every day. I get more and more calls saying, hey, Kim, I want to be federally up to par with those regulations. I need to be, because I know it's coming, and I want to make sure I'm making a safe product. It's really awesome that we have so many companies that work with us to try to help them, become compliant and have food safety, in mind, and worker safety as well. More consumers are becoming educated. So a lot of consumers are realizing that 90% of the THC or, CBD, same on the shelves has not been seen by a health department. And because people assume that when they go into a dispensary or a storefront, that everything that's being sold there is being regulated by the government, but that's just not the case right now. And so consumers are becoming more educated, and so they're looking at brands that have these kinds of certifications, and those are what they're buying more often. Same with I have clients that do make their own products and buy CBD oil or THC oil from a different company to do that. They won't even do business with them unless they at least have a GMP certification. That's happening more and more every day. And even states like Florida, Michigan, New York are actually requiring some level of GMP certification. And I don't think that that's a trend that's going away. More health departments are becoming better. So more and more health departments are actually coming online and saying, hey, we actually want to regulate cannabis. This has not been the case always. It was a huge fight for a lot of them to get involved and have regulations and that kind of thing, but they're starting to get braver. I have a lot of regulators that reach out to me, and I give them the lowdown, and it's super exciting. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. FDA is starting to come online on the hemp side. That should happen any day, they said 2 years ago. So we'll see what happens, but the FDA will have regulations that come out. And really, I know this is just something, because I'm an ex-regulator, that I always have to say, but regulators are not your enemies. Obviously there are the few that, seem like they are, but most of them are actually there to help you. And you can create a good relationship with them and always, you know, be kind to them, because they could have rough days too. So, but yeah, if you create good relationships with them, you can actually use them as a resource. You can call them and ask them questions and they'll give you answers, and think of it that way instead of just, oh God, somebody with a badge coming in to like tell me that everything needs to change, because that's not always the case.
Kim, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yes.
It would be kind of awkward if you said no. But you can. Could you go back? You said GMP certified. Just for those that might not know, or for like me have decided it's happy hour, can you explain what that stands for, what that is?
Yeah, I actually have a slide coming up that I will explain all of exactly what it is and break it down for you.
Cool. I'll butt out.
No, you're
great. You're doing great. Come on in. Come on in. You know? Come on in.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of covered all of this so far, but essentially what we're saying here is that there are other industries adjacent to our local cannabis industry to look to for best practices and guiding principles. Some of that is the developing hemp market right now, open market hemp, CBD, consumer packaged goods. Some of that is other states as we try to align. The dietary supplements industry is really taking a stronghold in the types of regulations and testing that's required on botanical ingredients such as hemp or cannabis products, right? So that is a huge takeaway from today. If you want to look for guidance, start looking at dietary supplement regulations for botanicals, and also looking at the hemp CPG supply chain. But certainly, how do you do that? You know, how do you get up to that level? It's CGMP certification is a really, really great way to go, as they say, and it is the gold standard moving forward. So really quickly, we're just going to say what's happening in Oregon. Right now, there's some regulation updates. So we'll go to the next slide and just touch base on that. You know, we had a Secretary of State audit. We can go to even the next slide as well, which says kind of the main takeaways here of that. One is that there's some diversion going on, and they pointed towards the OMMP market solution. Let's fold that sucker under the metric program with the OLCC as well. So that's taking place right now. There was a very highlighted concern for additives, as we know, and there is an OLCC regulated vape task force doing secret shopping around Oregon, pulling samples, testing them for highly toxic contaminants such as vitamin E acetate. Another stark difference there was that microbiology, metals, and mycotoxins were not required in Oregon, but they're pretty much required in every other regulated state that has cannabis testing. And so that is being added to the mix as well. And lastly, one of the main things that they highlighted is that the testing laboratories are not regulated or enforced, which leads to consumer safety issues and fraud concerns. Unfortunately, there is no enforcement discussed in the resolution of the SOS by the OHA at this time due to limited resources. So we are aligning with other states to get our micro metals and mycotoxins as a top priority here in Oregon at this time. So something to pay attention to. And then I think the next slide also talks a little bit more about that. We can skip this slide. It's pretty dark and gloomy. I'm like, people die and there's terrible things, you know, coming. It's true, okay? And heavy metals are everywhere. So, but these are really, really something to think about as well when people are like, oh no, more testing. You know, I mean, it is for public safety. There is data out there that says that these are toxic contaminants, especially when inhaled into your lungs. So
yeah. So I have a great story about being a regulator. Kind of great. It's not a great story. It's a terrible story. But pesticides. So when we wrote the regulations in Colorado, we didn't take into pesticides at all. We didn't think about that. We didn't even realize that would be an issue. Nothing. We didn't have it in the regulations at all. So we went out and started going in, and finally I started to notice these really toxic chemicals that were being stored. I started taking pictures. The fire department noticed it too. We all got together and like huddled in our little like rulemaking group. We were like, what do we do about this? So we did a bunch of research on these pesticides that were used for many different things, you know, powdery mildew, mostly things like that. and looked into it. And these are like highly carcinogenic toxins that are like systemic toxins. So myclobutanol, which is my absolute favorite pesticide, not really, it's not at all, but it's Eagle 20. It's used to get rid of powdery mildew, which powdery mildew is a mold that actually doesn't create a toxin. It just looks bad. So it's not even actually toxic to like inhale or ingest at all. It's just, yeah, right, Kelly? I hope I'm.
Yes.
Yeah, it just looks bad. It doesn't look very pretty. And so, you know, people are using these toxins that are definitely carcinogenic. There have been studies done, people that don't wear PPE and spray this, which has happened in Colorado a few times. Usually they get lymph cancer pretty quickly. It's pretty nasty stuff. But I did a recall one time. It was one of my biggest recalls that I ever did, for about $4.3 million in like one day. So this is like, yeah, it was really rough. But we were finding these concentrate shatter and waxes from this company that was doing this, and they were 56% myclobutanol. They weren't just like, oh, it's like 3% or 4%, which would be above the allowed amount, but it was more toxic chemical than actual like THC in that. Like, obviously, it's going to be terrible for you if you're dabbing that and inhaling it into your lungs. So this is the kind of stuff that these regulations, I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want that in my stuff. So I feel like it's just an example of what could happen if these regulations like don't happen. I'm off my soapbox.
I know there's so many great things. Oh, I have another terrible story. Actually, I can top that one. Go to the next slide. This is, yep, get ready. Hold on to your seats here, Kim. So this is an important part of managing a supply chain, which is essentially what we're talking about here. Botanical supply chain has a lot of control points for contaminants. And so considering the end consumer is really important when you are managing that supply chain. Mycotoxins, actually, there was a recall in January. In the United States, there were 100 dogs that died because of mycotoxin poisoning. Has nothing to do with cannabis, has nothing to do with anything. It was just a dog food treat, and they had a botanical ingredient in there that wasn't screened for mycotoxins, and 100 dogs died. That's my dog on the screen, Mr. Potatoes. And it just breaks my heart. So think about it, people. Application is important as well. And what I mean by that is the actual product that you're having is being inhaled, is it being consumed, is it being topically applied to someone, is it being, transdermally applied. Also considering the regulations of your products, both locally and federally. These are important components of best practices. Labeling requirements, as you guys know, in the Oregon Cannabis Association, labeling requirements, man, they get ya. It's different everywhere. In California, THC is listed on bottles, and it has to have like a pregnancy warning on there. Prop 65 is a big thing where they regulate all sorts of carcinogenic compounds and how they're labeled on products, and that applies to cannabis industries as well as hemp industries down there too. I'm sure Kim could speak a lot to that. And so also considering liability. And what I mean by liability, we throw that term around a lot, but I mean, this has to do with like whose liability is it when it's going through the supply chain? If Mr. Potatoes dies of mycotoxin poisoning, is it my problem as the dog food manufacturer? Am I the one that's going to get sued for that? Or is it the person that I bought the botanical supplements from that I use to put into my product? And how do you know the difference? Where do you draw that line? Knowing where that legal liability is transferred is key to knowing where you need to manage the control points in your supply chain to protect yourself against lawsuit.
Yeah, and regardless of the lawsuit, if your name is on that package and it's going out the door, the recall will actually have your company name on it anyway. So testing and making sure that anything you're putting in your products, that it's legit and it's not something that's poisonous, is really, really important. And it can help your brand stay alive.
Okay, cool. Let's go on.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kelly.
That was great. That was perfect timing. It was like, whoop.
Liability. It's a big deal. Okay, so here's my GMP compliance slide, Kim. So good manufacturing practices. The C is not for cannabis, it's for current good manufacturing practices. And that just means that the company is keeping up with the most current version of those regulations. All GMP is making sure that FDA regulation is being followed. So, you know, the FDA can send people in, not right now in a lot of facilities. They won't come in unless there's like a huge outbreak or something like that at this point, because they don't have regulations for hemp quite yet. And they don't have any regulations for THC at this time. But GMP takes those regulations, whether it's supplements or whether it's supplements or whether it's food ingredients or food products, and they essentially make regulations to make sure that those products are safe as can be based on the FDA regulations. That's really weird that I described it that way, but it ensures that, right. Yeah, so it ensures everything, you know, your drugs, medical devices, dietary supplements, food ingredients, that they're all, you know, they're following this thing. And they essentially go in and audit you for this certification about once a year. There are companies that do it every 2 years. It has to be done by an accredited certifying body. People ask me all the time, like, Kim, we love your company. Why can't you just do our certifying audit? But there's a huge ethical dilemma with that. You can either be a consultant or a certifying body, and those two work together. And it's been that way for like over 100 years. Accredited certifying bodies are, you know, of a much higher level. They have to abide by a whole lot of standards, usually from ANSI and things like that. And I think, you know, a lot of them have been around for literally over 100 years. And also, you know, it talks about claims and packaging and labeling and that kind of thing too. So it's a proactive part of quality assurance. Like I said, in a lot of wholesale food manufacturing, if you don't have a GMP certification, nobody's going to buy your product. Like, it will not be in Whole Foods. It will not be in King Soopers. It will not be in Fred Meyer's. It will not be anywhere. You have to actually have that just like as the base level compliance to get into anywhere or even sell internationally.
Yeah, very good point. Absolutely. So we're gonna just touch base on a few points out of this, a few arenas that you can look to CGMP certification or compliance and get an idea about best practices, right? And so here are some key points through CGMP that we've taken away, right? And one of them is contaminant dangers, right? Paying attention to contaminant dangers. So, you know, the number one cause of recall is microcontaminants, E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella. We know that. Heavy metals are in everything. We talked about pesticides. We talked about mycotoxins. Solvents, of course. These are all testing terms that we all know and love so much here in Oregon. And I know I do. It's important to understand the contaminant dangers because when you're running through a health and safety program as well and managing your supply chain, again, where does the onus fall on? You can actually save money through managing your supply chain if you have a really good understanding about where all these contaminant dangers are introduced. And I have a nice little chart that's a cheat sheet that's going to show you that in a little bit. But we'll go to the next slide and then Kim can talk to the next one.
Oh, yeah. So facilities. This is just like a breakdown of exactly what you need and things to think about. But I build a lot of facilities with companies, and a lot of time they just like don't really understand that you have to have hand sinks and things like that in order to make edible or even smokable products in the cannabis industry. Most people are relying on that supplement, the FDA CFR 111 regulations, even when it comes to smoking, because it is considered a consumable at this point. But you have to label your toxic chemicals, obviously. You have to put employee personal items somewhere else. Essentially, you have to treat the facility very much like a commercial kitchen. You can't have carpet in your facility. You have to have the floors, walls, and ceilings have to be constructed a certain way. You have to have a 3-compartment sink to do dishes in, things like that. So think of it in terms of commercial kitchen if you can.
And I do want to add to that as well, if you want to go back one sec, is that so we do environmental monitoring testing at Columbia Labs. There are other environmental laboratories that do this in the state of Oregon. There aren't any cannabis testing labs that do. But what that means is that you create a program according to your HACCP plan, which is your health. What is a HACCP plan? Sorry, Kim, help me. What's the acronym?
Hazard analysis and critical control points.
Never say that right. So with your HACCP plan, you get swabs and you get some Petri dishes, you set it all out, you send them into your lab of choice, they do the testing for you and say, there's no E. coli in this building, there's no Listeria in your sinks, there's no salmonella on these surfaces, right? So this is one way, like a real way, that Oregon companies can get their hands on a way to monitor their facilities and limit liability and control this contaminant introduction, is by actually testing your facility for pathogens, which are the #1 cause of recall and which do appear on cannabis, extracts, food, you name it. So this is something that I really encourage people to start to look into. It's not super expensive, and you can create the plan according to what your facility is like, catered to your business. And it's really just a way to make sure that, again, we're putting healthy, safe products out onto the market. So,
yeah. And that's always, we write HACCP plans for every single one of our clients. And we always, that is something that is required for GMP certification. So good ad.
Yes.
So yeah, ingredient sourcing. So this is one that actually I talk about all the time because it drives me crazy. Because it's really hard sometimes to explain to people why they can and can't use certain ingredients. We ran into this. So I put pictures up here because in many cases I ran into this issue. We had okay, so just so you know, regulators troll social media. They follow you on there and they watch everything you do. Just a heads up. So one day I was on social media, like browsing my clients, and there was a company, a regular donut shop making CBD donuts. It was all over their website. They were so excited about it. It was obviously a big hit, right? And I'm like, cool, CBD donuts. I wonder where they're buying their CBD from. Funny enough, we go in, we interview the guy, and he had a regular named John, no last name, brought in some CBD from his company, and we just put it in the frosting and went with it. I'm like, okay, cool. Show me the packaging. I'm thinking he bought this from somewhere. There's a label. No, it is literally just powder in a Ziploc bag, white powder in a Ziploc bag. It's isolate, but God knows what it really was. And so I had to really explain to him that, like, you just sold 4 donuts to like kids. And that could have been arsenic. It could have been, Ajax. It could have been cocaine. Like you didn't know. That's highly illegal. So really make sure that you're not just like jumping on the first opportunity and you're thinking about, where am I buying this from? We go and we vet other companies all the time because we have companies that'll do white labeling and things like that. And if those companies that are making their products or doing ingredients in their products are not following some kind of like food safety processing, then it's going to be a problem. And a lot of times we've done audits and the first thing we do is check their license. And sure enough, a lot of them are unlicensed in doing this. So that is highly illegal. So be very careful about who you're buying stuff from. We found that terpenes, a lot of people sell terpenes that are not food grade terpenes. So if you're buying alpha pinene from, let's say, a Christmas tree factory, that is not okay because there are some really toxic chemicals that are sprayed on Christmas trees because they're an ornamental plant. They're not meant to be ingested. So, if you're extracting terpenes from cannabis, that's a whole other different level. But just make sure if you're buying it from anywhere else, same with flavorings, same with essential oils. I've done so many recalls on like, well, it's a citrus essential oil. I'm like, that's great. But on this website, and when I called the company, this is not a food grade item. So it cannot be in your stuff. Other ingredients as well, even like flour and sugar, kind of vet them, reach out to them, talk to them about what processes they use. Most of those companies will have something, but you just never know still. And then vaping ingredients, because I always have to play devil's advocate, if you have a cherry flavoring that's supposed to be in hard candies and ingested in a certain way, is it healthy to put that in a vape pen and then, heat it and then inhale it into your lungs? That stuff always scares me. So always be really cognizant of like what you're actually putting in. They have actually found that like cinnamon flavoring in vape pens is actually very damaging to your lungs. So they're already doing studies about this kind of thing. Denver does an entire source approval of CBD. You're not allowed to sell your products at all in Denver County, which is the biggest cannabis market that there is in Colorado. If you don't do a shelf stability approval, which actually means it cannot sit out at room temperature, for longer than 4 hours. Go ahead, Kelly.
Add to this, and it's not to be too pluggy for you guys, but testing is the cornerstone of compliance and traceability. And like, if you are doing ingredient sourcing, calling and checking the website, sure, but ask for the COAs. Like,
Yes.
yeah, ask. And if you don't know how to read them, call me, because we'll help you out. I mean, it's important to do and understand where the things are coming from. And then it goes both ways, right? We talk about vendor vetting and then considering the end consumer, like you said, like stuff that's meant to be ingested versus inhaled, a very important consideration. But certainly check the testing and make sure that it matches the regulations that you need to meet. You can also add terpenes that won't test. I mean, we're adding heavy metals analysis right now in Oregon, and you could buy terpenes that are laden with heavy metals, and if you don't get the COA that matches the regulations that you need to try to meet, you've just contaminated your product and made it unsellable. So like those changing regulations, staying up on that, but also ingredient sourcing and vendor vetting, I would just say testing is a resource for you in those categories, and can be the safeguard against, a lot of issues that come up. So
yeah, we have a lot of people, we also run into almost daily what we do, fake COAs happens all the time. And it's terrible, but it happens all the time, not to like scare people. So, if you have a new vendor, I always recommend testing the product yourself before putting it in your stuff, just at least for the first few little times that you're having that transaction. Just a heads up. Awesome.
I just want to jump in real quick with a plug. If we can go back to the last slide, if someone could send me a healthy CBD donut, I would appreciate it.
yeah.
But really, I just want to hit this home, and I think you did a good job there. But as a business owner sitting listening to this, it's like, oh crap, what am I putting into my products? I have 15 vendors. How do I make sure? So you're saying know your people, give them a call, ask them where their sourcing comes from. How can you tell when you said fake COAs? How do you know when that isn't real? Do you have to test every ingredient yourself? Is that what you're saying?
That's what GMP requires that anyway, for the vendor vetting SOP. Like you have to test it for a certain number of times, before you say that vendor has been vetted and they're okay, which I do recommend. And you can't tell if a COA is actually real or not, unfortunately, unless you do that testing. So it kind of just depends on how much risk. Also, we do third-party audits, and a lot of companies like mine do, where if you're like, hey, is this place that wants to sell me this, are they sketchy or are they cool? And just say, hey, we have a third-party auditor that's going to come in and do a food safety, an FDA audit of your facility, something really light. They don't have to be GMP certified. That's a lot. But if you go in and don't see any huge major issues, then they're good to go. I mean, I have entire places that just do white labeling, they're we have 3 different people that do white labeling for us, and then 3 other states, and they just let us go in, do this audit every 6 months, and we send them the report, and they feel good about that because somebody has their eyes on that. It's a little scary out there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks. I think we have a lot of members who really, I know, are brand passionate and proud of the products they sell, but they don't think about every single piece that goes in there. So yeah, thanks.
It's a lot. Go ahead, Kelly.
That sounds like a great resource. I love that. Just come on in and audit for me. That sounds great.
We do it all the time. Yeah. And that's one of our biggest sellers is just that one-time audit because it's so easy. We do it for investors, before they buy a place. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So.
And then this slide here is kind of a summary of what we've just talked about, knowing the regulations. We talked about considering the supply chain with vendors and liability. There's a couple in here that we haven't touched on that we should probably highlight too. R&D and resources, using testing as a resource for you as you're looking at vendors, and also managing environmental contaminant control points, like that facilities production that we mentioned there. A couple we didn't touch on that we'll just highlight briefly before we move on is documentation. CGMP, jokingly and lovingly, is commonly referred to as get more paper, which isn't like paper, it's like paper, because you have to document everything. And that's really what batch traceability is all about. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. unless you're in the OLCC and it was on camera. Just kidding. But really, it's really, really important to have a lot of documentation on every aspect. People are signing off on everything that they do and dating everything. So there's very strict requirements when it comes to that for CGMP requirements. But I will say, just as best practices, like if you're not going to be CGMP and you're like, wow, that sounds really daunting, but maybe the takeaway from this presentation could be like, what could I do now to really just up my game and help control this? Start documenting and keeping a ledger. There's some great software out there. Laboratory software for this is really, really involved. We use Qualtrics here at Columbia Laboratories, and it manages everything when it comes to like everything from complaints to quality control, audits. You can schedule audits all through there. So there's some pretty robust stuff you can get software-wise, but documentation, keeping all your records for quite some time is highly recommended. And then the other one we didn't really touch on is employee training. And which ties into documentation, but that is one of the cornerstones of CGMP that we could take away. So we could have titled this slide CGMP cornerstones, but this is just best practices, right? So this is a more general version. It's not like you have to go through and have this, mega checklist and all this stuff, but start paying attention to how these things are applied in your business. And you can certainly edge your way into an industry that's rapidly expanding and evolving and encouraging these types of practices as regulated, mandated performance practices. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So documentation is huge. In fact, most of what we do when we're helping a client with CGMP certification is documentation and employee training. Like we pretty much do all the heavy lifting for the client when it comes to that stuff, because it takes forever. It takes like 170 billable hours just to like get the documentation in place, depending on the company. And so when I was a regulator, like regulator horror story, but when I would go into companies and I would say, listen, this product is hot for heavy metals. Can you show me what grow this came from, what ingredients you used in it, or brownie or whatever it was that I was bringing in. And if they couldn't show me their documentation, their batch number system that said, this is the only batches that were affected, this is why we traced it back, we traced it forward, we know exactly where it is. If they didn't have that documentation in place, we would do what we call an any and all recall, which means we have no proof that everything in your facility is contaminated in this way. And so what we would do was we would recall literally everything that they have ever made in the lifetime of their entire company. So documentation is really, really key. Like I can't even tell you, I have put, and not on purpose, but we have put places out of business because of this, because you can't recover from something like that when everything that you've ever sold has to come back to you, and every person that you sold it to has to be alerted to this. It'll ruin your business. So documentation is like unbelievably key. Thank you for bringing that up, Kelly.
Get more paper. Okay.
Lots of paper. Yeah.
What we're going to kind of breeze through, I think. Most of these are probably my slides a little bit more now. So just some tips and trades. Lots of labs are now ISO accredited, so that's great because that's a great standard to achieve. We always encourage looking for that on any testing lab that you use, of course, and having good standing in ORLAP. And then we can just kind of cruise right through. So this is what I was talking about kind of like managing your supply chain, knowing where your contaminants are possibly introduced, and then what testing could be a resource for you to help to monitor those control points. So at this point in time, there's compliance. We have, veg going into processing. They only want it tested for, pesticides. And then but you could test for all these other things that might be a consideration. Why would you test for them? Perhaps mycotoxins, because there's an unknown kill step. They're deadly for inhalation. Why would you, want to test for additional pesticides? I mean, glyphosate, #1 ingredient in Roundup. It's disgusting. And it's out there and it's not regulated. If that matters to you, the testing is available. Micro pathogens, yeast and molds. I mean, the list goes on. Sold as smokable flower is a very important thing to consider as well, because there's no kill steps or processing. It just goes straight into someone's lungs. So that's the most important consideration, in my opinion, and to know that our lungs are not meant to handle anything but air. So we're kind of pushing our luck as it is. But that being said, these are control points, right? So if we go to the next slide, I think I have, okay, so this is a good way to look at it as well, because this is California, and we talk about states aligning, and like, man, what should I consider and what's going on? This is how they regulate it, and it's considered the gold standard for cannabis testing. This is kind of where we're headed for Oregon. So when you guys look at these slides later, you can take a peek at this, and this is a really good indication about how it's going to be tested, at what level in the market coming up here in the next year. I think they're going to implement that. And then, so some resources as well, you know, other things you can test for, just to show those for you. Nutritional facts panels, there's varying levels of that. Allergens, right? Do you work in a shared kitchen? Do you share some space with someone where you're infusing products with cannabis? Do they make you use nuts or something? I mean, these are something to consider. I've seen it. I've been there. I've been in those buildings where someone's making a product that has nuts in it right next to a product that's a gummy product. And I would highly suggest testing for allergens. Environmental monitoring, we touch base on that, and monitoring for HACCP and CGMP. Soil to oil traceability is another reason to manage the supply chain, you know, that traceability to limit legal liability, like Kim just said, and protect your assets. And then, of course, the Oregon Food Safety License is a good place to start. If you're like, where the heck do I start with all this nonsense? Start there. It's a great place to start. We'll get your facilities swabbed, tested, up to date, get someone in there taking a peek, give you an audit, and that's a great place to get started. So these are just some ideas to get started. And then the next one is a little resource for you guys here. And this is a basic for representative sampling. So I'll just say that sampling creates a huge variability among your analytical results. It is like the number one reason why there would be variability in your numbers, right? Because sampling is a variable experience, right? Someone else is pipetting something or automatically pipetting something, and then there's instruments, right, in the laboratory. But sampling, humans are doing that. So if you're the human that's doing the sampling, the best way that you can get reliable results where you control that variability is to have representative sampling every time. And there's a way to do that. It brings you back to high school chemistry or high school, you know, science, where you're learning your SOP for representative sampling. This is it. This is how you can vet laboratories. You know, you're like, oh man, lab A and lab Z, they gave me like 20% difference. I just don't get it, you know? Well, maybe you grabbed a big old bud out of the corner over here, and then the other one had like a big stick in it that you didn't see in the middle because it's a nug on a stick, right? So like, you're grabbing these different things, you don't know what the components are to those, right? And then so it's going to test very differently. So you can't tell whether a lab is testing consistently or not if you have inconsistent product, right? So if you're lab shopping, this is a great way to do it, to know exactly what you're looking at. Representative sampling tips. You provide a large enough sample size to encompass every heterogeneous aspect of that, right? A good size sample. Smaller samples, not as representative. Bigger samples, more representative. Ensure that the identity is consistent with the batch identity. This goes to labeling, right? Preventing cross-contamination, gloves, cover your beard, cover your mouth, cover your hair, and then composite a representative sample. So we've got a very heterogeneous plant. We need to get top, middle, bottom, every aspect of that you want to be representative. If you only want to represent your A buds, then get a batch of A buds and grab 10 of them together to composite one sample. If you want to know what the whole harvest looked like from top stalk to bottom stalk, take one of them and have that be your sample, composite it all together. That'll be the most representative sample that you can get out of your product. You want to use consistent sampling methods. Like I said, variability between sampler to sampler, that's going to totally jack up your numbers. It's not going to even be reliable data. And then obviously get more paper. So that's those are some tips there. We have more details there. And yeah, I think that about covers it. We went through some basic tips and ways to get started right now to ensure best practices. Heavy lean on CGMP compliance, which really is a good place to get looking. And then if there's anything else that we could touch base on that, we're happy to review.
Sorry, I didn't mean to flip that on you.
It's cool. I like the dog.
Yeah, right? He's so cute.
Thank you both so much. I'm glad this was recorded because I'm gonna have to go back and kind of rewatch a little bit to kind of dig into. There's so much information there, and you two should really take this on the road because I think this like double of like the consultant former regulator and like testing pro. It's people will be excited about it, and it's really important information to share with folks. I think
There's a
real quick,
reason why me and Kelly got along right away. Sorry.
Yeah.
if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat and then I'll share them with the group. Oh, look at, we have, just a fantastic thank you. Thanks, Jules. So I just, if you could reiterate, you mentioned this at the beginning, but you know, one of the things that OCA is working on right now is a white paper about legalization federally. We see that coming in the very near future. And you mentioned being prepared for that with these kind of standards. What exactly will change, or do you see changing as a requirement for businesses once that happens? Who's going to come walking in their doors that hasn't been able to before, and how do they need to be ready for them?
So I'll just take this first, and then Kelly has probably even more to add on top of this. But yeah, so right now, I mean, everybody in the cannabis industry states that they're the highest regulated industry in the world, but they're not federally legal yet. So that is an untrue statement. You think you're regulated now, you have no idea. Once the USDA, the FDA, and OSHA start knocking on your doors, that's when things are going to get real, like really, really real. In fact, I had a client call me in a panic, I don't know, maybe a month ago. Not even a client. I mean, we did work for him a long time ago, but he called us. OSHA had shown up, and he got about a $200,000 fine in about 5 minutes of them being there because they weren't right. You know, they weren't ready for anything at that point. And I would say most companies don't have any kind of like food safety plan in place, or, you know, testing standard or sampling standard or any of that kind of thing. And all of that is required by the FDA. So there's a lot of documentation that's just required by the FDA. GMP is a small level above what the FDA requires. Which is why I am really urging companies to get GMP certified if they can, before that happens, because they will be ready for the FDA when that happens and comes in. Most of my clients, we do GMP certification, we do ISO 9001 next, and during that same time, we get them compliant with OSHA standards as well, because OSHA is the same thing. You need paper for it. It is a paper trail. If somebody gets injured, you are so screwed. And I, you know, to be nice, I really don't want to see that happen. It is awful. I've seen it firsthand. So those are the three that we really deal with. And those are going to be super detrimental to the industry when it becomes federally legal.
So right now, does OSHA regulate cannabis facilities?
So they do not, because it isn't federally legal until there is an incident. So if somebody gets hurt or there is a complaint, and so what we have seen is people getting hurt, right? We had a company a long time ago that they do the hot sugar for the hard candies, and somebody spilled it on their arm, and like it was 3rd-degree burns. It was terrible. Yeah, that gets documented. OSHA comes in. If there is a complaint, so you have a disgruntled worker, they could call OSHA right now and have them show up at your door, and that will happen. But that's the only basis that they are working on. Other than that, they are not going in. But you know, once it becomes federally legal, then they're going to start doing their regular audits just like they do everybody else.
I did not know that. Yeah, I did not know that. I did not know that OSHA doesn't have any jurisdiction over cannabis companies right now. Oh yeah, that's huge.
Well, technically they have jurisdiction, like they have power there.
Yeah, like like it's that same kind of like structure for sure.
Yeah, they're not regularly going in though. That is, and FDA too. If there was a huge outbreak that was across state lines in the CBD industry that killed more than like 5 people, yeah, FDA would come in and they would do something about it. But most of those things are, you know, the outbreaks that I have seen, a lot of botulism, things like that. It has affected dogs, Kelly, like you said, because that really sucks. So the FDA doesn't get involved in those cases, and a lot of like local and state jurisdictions handle it on their own.
I'm going to add to that too, because you're talking about how, oh shoot, maybe I lost it. I might have lost it. I was right there with you. You said botulism, I got distracted.
Yeah, it does grow in cannabis, so be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I totally lost it, but you were saying who would come knocking in on your door in Osha and stuff like that as well. And yeah, huge recall. I mean, that just totally blows my mind. I'm still blown by that. I mean, there's been some huge explosions and stuff in processing laboratories too that have like up in Washington not that long ago. And people were seriously injured in that too. So that must have been.
Yeah, one of the problems that we've run into that is like a regularly occurring thing is that OSHA obviously is not allowing is the use of like electronics in a class 1 division 1 blast room where they're doing hydrocarbon extraction, which we work with a lot of hydrocarbon clients that are using butane and propane and those kinds of things to extract.
I could highlight a cool company, and I have permission from them to do this in the Oregon Cannabis Association. Actually, Sublime Solutions, I did a tour of their facility at one point, and they have a room that has like a half a second complete vacuum out of it, and it's like where they do all the explosive processing, and it's so intense. Like it's like a panic room or something. You like press this big red button, and this huge like ventilation system comes and just sucks everything out of there. It's pretty wild. But I mean, that's kind of the level you got to think about when you talk about, you said training employees, caring about your employees and things like that as well. I mean, that's a big part of it, not just to do with liability, but certainly about like safety, right? Straight up safety.
Yeah, you have to care about your employees, and that's exactly what a class 1 division 1 blast room does. I mean, it is ready for if there is a fire, the minute that spark happens, those vents come on and it's crazy. I've actually like seen it because I used to work with the fire department a whole lot in this, and they've like set one off on purpose before. It is like crazy, like the weirdest thing ever. But we had so many explosions in Colorado, like in the beginning, that it was like, I have videos of it's terrible, like terrible. So yeah, it's cool though.
Yeah, it is. It is really cool. And I just, and out of this, I know it's the end. I just really want to encourage anybody to watch this. Like, don't be intimidated by stepping up your business practices and your safety practices and your documentation practices. And don't be afraid to ask for help and guidance. And there's so much out there to give you that edge in the market, but also to protect your business, protect your employees, protect the public who's smoking your stuff. Like, it is so vital to the health and the longevity and sustainability of our industry as a whole for everyone to take responsibility for this. And it is going to be forced down your throats pretty soon also. So there's also that, but you don't have to be, investing everything you have now to flip into GMP like right away and stuff. Take steps to get into that direction, and start researching some software about documentation practices and make your life a little bit easier and things like that. Get in touch with your local fire marshal too, and have that good relationship with them, and they really can help you out in setting up your facility to be a very safe place. So that's kind of my part in shot with it, is like I'm all about CGMP. We work with a ton of vertically integrated, like internationally traded companies, and there is a whole nother level of experience out there than is regulated in Oregon, and the enforcement is coming. But when you break it down to really just our business, our communities here in Oregon, and like how we can start to roll towards that, it's really just an incremental process, and start to uncover the hood and really dig into the resources that you have either for testing or consulting, but certainly the World Wide Web. Just get out there and start really challenging yourself to ensure better practices in your business industries.
Yeah, and it's attainable.
Yeah, totally.
You can do it.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
you can do it.
I'm glad you said that, Kelly. And I feel like as just sitting here, like putting my shoes of like a small, family-run business, like, who's like made it through COVID, made it through some of like the toughest years, made it through the vape crisis. Now this, right? And I'm like starting to have a panic attack. So, and you said, no, I'm not. I'm okay, but I'm just, it's close, right? So, and I will send some material out with the video, and we'll put it in the links too. But can each of you give us just like one parting, like, what's the first thing that you would do if you were like a small family-run business and you want to make sure that you're protected, your systems are in place? Like, can you give me a tangible first step?
I guess I could go first. You know, we work with companies that are 5 people big, and we work with companies that are 300 people big. You know, it doesn't, the resources are out there. First of all, you can read FDA regulation if you want and try to learn it yourself. I think everyone should at least take a look, but it's a lot of reading and it's a lot of that, you know, regulator jargon. Like, you're not going to understand all of it. Part of what consultants do is look at that and evaluate it for you and explain it to you. So, you know, we work with companies that are small and large, with small budgets, big budgets. But, you know, the thing is that right now you can have a small budget and do like 5 hours a month of consulting, and we can get through 2 or 3 SOPs a month and get you there slowly, even just to FDA compliance. You don't necessarily need the GMP certification unless when you get there, you're like, hey, let's, you know, that's awesome. Let's do it. You know, and that's the way me and many other consultants work. You know, we want to help the little guys. We want them to do well. But if you start 4 years from now, or even a year or 2 from now, because the FDA regulations are coming out for CBD, according to them, that's going to be like their platform for THC. You know, if you don't think about it, you're going to be rushed. And then it's going to cost you a whole lot more in a very small amount of time to get compliant. And instead, you're just going to have to pay a bunch of fines. So think about it, take really small steps, read those regulations, get a food safety plan, get a hazardous communication plan, get a fire prevention plan in place, you know, get a CAPA plan, get a recall plan. Like there's like little things you can do that will help you exponentially. I know that sounds like a lot, but you know, as long as you have something in place proving that you're doing something, it's going to help you in those situations. So, I mean, I'm not saying hire us. There's a whole lot of consulting firms out there that are excellent firms that can help you. But even just having the conversation with your staff, or hiring someone with some kind of compliance background, you know, that can help you write these SOPs and get things in place, I mean, is a really great thing. I think you should reach out to regulators, including a health department. Even if that health department does not regulate, they will come in and visit you and maybe do like a mock audit. Those kinds of things people don't really think about, but you can definitely do that. You never know. You might get a thumbs up. And then they'll like you in the future, which is always a good thing. So I don't know. I think just starting small, you don't have to start big. You don't have to bite off the whole, you know, cookie in one bite. You can, you know, chip away at it, and over a period of time, you know, you'll get there. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, absolutely. Start with research, right? Like we said, there's a couple of adjacent industries to take a peek at, right? You look at the food regulated industry for manufacturing practices and how to maintain environmental monitoring. You look at the dietary supplement industry, okay, for vendor vetting and supply chain management through testing practices. And then what's the other one we talked about? Oh, the hemp industry. And then looking at the hemp industry and how that supply chain is managed and what the requirements are on that as well. And I would say, like, if you're like, I kind of like just want to start learning a little bit about there, start dipping into those 3 things. We'll include some resources. I highly recommend taking a peek at the American Herbal Products Association. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite membership that I'm a part of. They have incredible resources. They have like
I think you mean second favorite.
I so mean.
I'm just kidding.
I absolutely mean second.
No, I'm just kidding.
Don't tell Jesse. No. They're third on the list. They're third on the list. No, really. I mean, it's a great. They are awesome. They are almost as awesome. But yeah, dietary supplements, hemp, and then food manufacturing are the 3 kind of industries to look at. Just seeing how that's coming down. But like I said, just like we gave kind of a general best practices, you know, representative sampling, documentation, getting all your control points at least understood. You know, just start there with a gap analysis, and you'd be good to go. So.
Yeah, gap analysis might give you a better idea, which is always good. So sorry, go ahead.
That's good. No, I was going to do my final thank yous. Thank you, Kim Stuck from Allay Consulting and Kelly O'Connor from Columbia Laboratories. Even if we're your second favorite trade association, I'll take it, because both you and Kim, I am so appreciative for your expertise and the way you're so willing to share what you know to protect our businesses and help them grow. You know, we're passionate about Oregon's market, and I know that as we're going into federalization, we are looking at how we can protect our brands and protect what makes Oregon great. So starting right now to make sure that our companies have in place what they need to have in place to compete nationally is so important.